All right, so let's start a tutorial in Pro Tools. So if we do Command-N, we're going to get our new session dialog window. We have session in Sketch. We'll go over Sketch at another time. But session is for recording, editing, and mixing, and all the basic things we're going to do. Give your session an appropriate name. Typically, how I like to do this is I like to put the artist name, the name of the song, and then the date. That's typically how I name all my sessions. You can create it from a template if you have one. You can see I have a few. And typically, I'll go wave, 24-bit, 44.1 or 48, depending on the situation, but you can go higher if you need to. And one very important thing I would check is prompt for location. This is going to allow you to select where you save your files. So this is really important. Otherwise, it's just going to go right here to documents, and then I might forget where it is. All right, so we already have a session open, so I'm not going to do that. And then obviously, you can open up recent ones. Use Cloud, which is basically just to collaborate with people online. But we're just going to focus on the basics for today. Okay, perfect. So now let's go over the top bar of Pro Tools here. So let's go over these 4 different but very important editing modes. So grid mode basically means that all your movement will snap to the grid. As you can see, these little vague lines here, right here, if I turn that off, you'll see them go away. So I'm going to turn that on. You can see these faint grid lines here. That's going to allow all my movement to be constrained and snap to the grid. To change that value, I can go here and I can select minutes, time code, feet, and frames, but I can make the note length shorter. So I could do 64 notes, as you can see, much finer movement, but still snap to the grid. All right. So that's basically all there is to grid mode. Now, if you click on this again, we have this thing called relative grid. Now, this isn't something you're going to often use, but what's nice about it is, let's say you have a pickup note. So let's say real quick, this is our pickup note here, and I want to move this start of the downbeat to a grid line, but preserve the pickup line. So normally, if you were to do this, you can see the pickup note snap to the grid line. And now that's not going to be a pickup note anymore, so that's not what I want. But if I turn on relative grid, I should be able to move it and have it preserved as such. Now we're going to go to slip mode. Slip mode is basically completely free. Pretend like you slipped off the grid, and now everything is completely infinite. You can move it as tiny or as long as you want. There is no constraint to movement whatsoever. There's no snapping to the grid. It's just completely free. Now, a very useful feature is, let's say I'm in grid mode, but I want to quickly access slip mode. If I hold the command key, notice that now my movement is in slip mode, which is really nice. So a lot of the times I'll stay in grid mode, hold command, and move it in slip mode here like this. Inversely, if you're in slip mode and you want it to snap to grid, you can hold command, and now it'll snap to the grid. So very useful toggle feature to go seamlessly between the 2 modes. So most of the time, you're going to be dealing with grid mode and slip mode. Those are the 2 big modes that you're going to be using 99% of the time, typically. Spot mode, you're going to probably be using the least, but what spot mode is when you make a movement, you have to input exactly where you want it to go. So every single movement has to be input in this dialog window. The only reason I might use this is if you have a very specific cue sheet of time code spots where you need to put very specific sound effects. So let's say you have a whole sheet of sound effects, very specific time codes, and you want to put them right exactly in these spots, then spot mode could be useful. But generally, I almost never use this editing mode. And then last but not least, we have shuffle mode. Shuffle mode is a very strange mode, but it's very, very powerful, and it's one of my favorite things in Pro Tools. So with shuffle mode, basically what happens is if you make a selection and hit delete, it's going to shuffle everything back. Everything on that track is going to be shifted backwards in time. So if I make a delete here, notice that everything shuffled backwards. If I'm in grid mode and I make a deletion, you can see that that space is empty, it's preserved. But with shuffle mode, it will shuffle everything back. So what's really useful about this is it's a very easy way to sort of consolidate audio, cut time out. It can be very, very useful in a lot of editing situations, but it's also very dangerous. So if you don't know what you're doing, you can move everything out of time in your session, and that's very dangerous. But, one thing that could be really nice is the client might be like, hey, let's cut this verse out and just move the chorus back. Done very easily. So shuffle mode, one of my favorite features, especially if you like bring in an MP3 to a session and maybe you have a little bit of time there at the beginning. You can just be in shuffle mode here and you can make that selection, hit delete, and that'll shuffle the time back. Also, what's interesting about it is if you use a trim tool, that'll also move things back, which is also incredibly useful for certain editing situations. But we'll get into the trim tool in a little bit. Now, another weird feature to shuffle mode that not many people know is you can actually shuffle clips around. So I'm going to move this over. So if I go into shuffle mode here and I take this and move it on top of this clip, they'll actually shuffle their locations, which is really, really cool. So I'll do that with a different looking clip right here. So if we go to shuffle mode, you can see that the clips have swapped places. So that's a unique feature about shuffle mode not a lot of people know about. So typically shuffle mode is just used for getting rid of space. As you can see, one more time. There you go. So those are the 4 editing modes in Pro Tools, and they're very, very important. But as I said, typically you're going to be in grid or slip most often, and there's lots of situations I will go into shuffle mode, but then go right back to slip and grid. So that's all for that. Moving on to the next part here, we have our zoom controls. These are very simple. Zooming in, zooming out. This is your waveform view to make it bigger or smaller. And this right here is for the MIDI notes. And these are zoom presets. So 1 being all the way out, 5 being all the way in. Now, as far as zoom goes in Pro Tools, I much prefer using commands, so I never actually use this. So to tell you the commands really quick, R and T will zoom in and out as such. R and T. For waveform zoom, what you use is this. Option command, left and right bracket on the Mac. Option command, left and right bracket, and that's your waveform zoom. Now to get back to the default zoom, which is very, very important, you're going to want to hit Control, Option, Command, and left bracket. And now you can see I'm back at the default waveform zoom. So those commands are incredibly important. All right, moving on. This right here, we'll just toggle the track zoom, make it bigger and smaller. We have our magnifying glass here, which is just like a zoom tool. But as I said, I never use this. I'll just use the shortcuts. And if you right click, you'll see there's another option as well. Now, these 3 tools are incredibly, incredibly important in Pro Tools. All right, so we're going to first break them down one by one, and then we're going to combine them all together. All right, so first we have our trim tool. So our trim tool basically will just trim the beginning and ends of our audio clips. So as you can see, if I drag, it's trimming the clip right here. Okay, pretty straightforward. Now, if I right click on it again, I have time compression and expansion. This is one of my favorite features in Pro Tools, where basically you can stretch time and preserve pitch. So real quick to demonstrate time compression and expansion, I'm going to take a little clip here, play it for you first. Now I'm going to take this and compress the time. Now you can see if you overdo it, you can get a lot of artifacts. If you ever heard someone talking really fast in a commercial, that's how they do it. They use the time compression expansion tool. Very, very useful little tool. And you can see when you just do a little bit, it becomes a lot more subtle and there's less artifacts. All right, so that's the time compression expansion tool. Then we have a simple loop tool. So as you can see, that's just going to keep looping that section. And that's all there is for the trim tool. Typically, I'll just leave it in the standard mode. So in the middle here, we have our selector tool. This is basically just to make a selection on the timeline like so. And that's all there is to it. All right, so the grabber tool is just used to click and drag audio, like you're seeing here. So you can click it, move it wherever you need to. Now, if you right click, you're going to see there's some other options here. One is separation tool, and this is a very interesting tool. So in Pro Tools, let's say you want to grab a piece of audio. Normally what you have to do is select it, hit B to break it up, and then you can move it. But with the grabber tool, you can actually just make a selection and then click and drag it, and that will separate it. So it's just a quicker way to break up audio in a longer clip, and sometimes it can be very useful. And the last tool is the object tool. Basically what the object tool allows you to do is while holding shift, you can select separate clips instead of selecting all the time in between. So this allows you to be a little bit more selective with what you decide to select. All right, so Now, this is one of the most important things in Pro Tools right here. If you hover a little bit above here on this bracket, you're going to see something called Smart Tool. The Smart Tool allows you to use all these tools simultaneously. And this is really the only way you should be working in Pro Tools. This is incredible. So if I click up here, you're going to notice that they're all selected. By the way, you can do Command 7, and that'll turn them all on as well. So what's so incredibly useful about your Smart Tool is depending where you hover your mouse, it'll change the tool. So if I hover low, it's a grabber. In the middle, it's a selection tool. At the end is a trimming tool. And if you go to the corners, you have a fading tool. Go in between two clips, you have a crossfade tool. So as you can see, this saves a tremendous amount of time, especially for editing workflow and recording workflow and every type of workflow. So you should only be using the Smart Tool. This is the mode you always want to be in. I don't think there's any good situation to where you should be using one of these at a time. You can see how much longer that took just going back and forth between tools. So remember, always turn on the Smart Tool. It's one of the most important features of Pro Tools and one of my favorite things about it. Okay, moving on. This is the scrubber tool. So this allows you to scrub the audio. This can be useful if you're trying to locate like a click or pop, but I typically don't use this. Your pencil tool is going to be used primarily for drawing automation. This is volume automation, and I'm using the pencil tool to draw the automation. If you right-click, you have lots of different modes. So on and so forth. All right, let's go over the bottom part here. Tab to transients is also a very important feature in Pro Tools, and absolutely one of my favorite features. So what it allows you to do is tab to the start of transients in audio. So normally if I hit the tab key, it's going to tab to the beginning and ends of these regions you see here. There's multiple ways to tab in Pro Tools. So if you hit the tab key, it's going to tab forward. Option tab to tab backwards. And you can also use the L and quotation key. L to go left, quotation key to go right. So to reiterate, when tab to transient is off, it's going to tab to the beginning and end of these regions. But now if I turn this on, it's going to pay attention to the audio within these regions, and it's going to actually tab to them. All right, so if I hit tab, you notice now that instead of going to the beginning and the end of these clips, I'm actually tabbing to the beginning of the audio waveforms. So this is so incredibly useful if you want to hone in on like a kick drum or a snare drum at the start of the song. So let's say I want to make a breakpoint right here. I could just click before the clip, hit tab again. Then I can hit the A key to delete everything before the playback head. And now I have a very neat edit. So tab to transient is by far one of the most amazing features in Pro Tools, and I'm using it all the time. To toggle that on and off with a shortcut, it's Command Option Tab if you want to turn that on and off. Okay, moving forward. This is link timeline and edit selection. All that means is that if you make a selection, it's reflected on your timeline up here. So you can see right here all these numbers, bars, beats, minutes and seconds, etc. This is my timeline. So when I make a selection, it is reflected up here on the timeline. Now if I unlink that and I turn it off, notice that I can make a selection somewhere else, but the original selection on the timeline remains the same. And there is definitely sometimes where you actually might want to do this. For separate controls in recording situations, believe it or not, it does have its uses. But all it is unlinking the edit selection and the timeline selection. Link track and edit selection. So what this means is when I make a selection on track, notice that the name of the track here is highlighted in white. I'll do that again. You can see it's highlighted in white. So if I turn this off and I make a selection on another track, notice that it doesn't select the current track, it's still selected on the previous track. And believe it or not, in certain recording situations, I actually find this very useful, so I don't select the track below. But we'll go into that stuff later. So this allows you to just unlink that selection, just like the previous one. The next tool here is insertion follows playback. So this is very useful. All this means is that when I hit play and then I hit stop on the spacebar, by the way, to toggle play in Pro Tools, you just hit the spacebar, it's going to stop wherever I hit the spacebar. Okay, so to demonstrate, notice that wherever I hit spacebar and I hit the stop, it'll stop right there where I have selected. Okay, but if I turn this off and I hit play again, it's going to return to the point of origin. Okay, so notice that one more time. It returns to the point of origin. You can toggle this on and off with the N key. And there's many, many situations you're going to want to have this on, and many situations you're going to want to have this off. So it's very important to know this one. And I definitely recommend you write down that keyboard command because you're going to be doing this all the time. Some situations you're going to want to return to the point of origin. Other situations you're going to want to stop where you hit stop. Like so. Okay, moving forward. This is automation follows edit. This is very easy. So if you draw some automation on a clip and you move that clip somewhere else, you can see that the automation follows with the clip. If you don't want that, you can click it again. Notice the automation's still there. And if I move it, it's not going to follow the clip. It's going to stay where it was. This is markers follow edit. This is a newer feature in Pro Tools that allows you to drop track markers, meaning you can drop a marker right on a track, which is only specific to that track. That can be very useful for a very specific situation, or maybe there was a mistake just on the bass guitar. You could drop that marker right on the bass guitar track. Very, very cool. So if I go up here and I turn on my marker controls, let's say that this was a bass track and there was a mistake right here. I could drop a marker and be like mistake in bass. And notice that's going to go right below the track, which is very, very cool. So if I turn on markers follow edit, if I move this clip, the marker will follow with it. The next thing here is mirrored MIDI editing. I'm going to use a MIDI example and we'll go over later how to do this, but for now, let's just keep it simple. So let's say I have multiple MIDI clips. Now let's say there's one wrong note in one of the clips and I want it to affect all the clips. If I turn this on, it's going to mirror that editing. So let's look at this top note here. That notice that if I move it down, it moved down in all the other clips. It's mirrored. But if I turn that off and I just want to affect one clip, notice that I was able to move all these notes without affecting the other clips, okay? This can be very useful for certain situations. Then the next thing we have here is layered editing. This basically allows you to move a clip on top of a clip without deleting information. So if I have this on, notice that if I move this clip on top of it and then I take it off, it doesn't delete the clip behind it. If I turn this off and I move a clip on top of another clip, notice that now that space is deleted. So that's what layered editing is. All right, now let's look at our main counter. Our main counter is basically just where we can see our bars and beats, minutes and seconds, time code, feet and frames, samples, and you can even show a sub counter and decide what you want. So a lot of times I'll either do bars and beats on top and then I can do minutes and seconds below, just so I can see both because they're both very useful pieces of information. If you click on the number here, you can type anything you want, hit enter, and then I'm at bar 5. Or maybe you want to go to 20 seconds, you can type in that, 20, hit enter, there you go. This section will show you the start time, the end time, and the length of your selection. Moving on, we're back at our grid selection here. Turning this on and off will show your grid lines. Then you can change your grid values. I also really like the commands, option command plus and minus on the numpad for your nudge values, and control option plus and minus on the numpad to change your grid values. So that's a very quick and easy way to change your grid values. Now let's talk about nudge. Nudge is also an amazing feature in Pro Tools that I use very, very often. Let's set our nudge value to 1 bar. So now if I select the clip and I use plus or minus on my numpad, I can nudge that clip by the selected value. So notice that if I hit minus, I'm nudging it back by 1 bar. Plus, I'm nudging it forward by 1 bar. You can also do this with a period and comma key if you don't have a numpad. Where I find this the most useful is sometimes things can be a little bit out of time. So I like to go to minutes and seconds, turn on 10 milliseconds, And let's say this bass part just feels a little bit out of time. If I have the 10 millisecond nudge on, I can move it just a little bit. And then using my ear, I can keep nudging it until it sits perfectly in time. Very, very, very useful feature. All right, let's continue to move forward. The next thing here is our transport controls. This first icon here is used to sync to an external machine, so only use this if you're actually syncing to an external machine. Then we have some basic fast forward and rewind. As you can see, this can go to the beginning and end of your session. Hold this and you have a fast forward. Hold it, you got rewind. We have a stop, play, and our record button. Now there's some different modes in this that I'm going to go over. So if you right click on the playback button here, you have a few options. One is half speed. Another that's not talked about often is prime for playback. So if you have a lot of plugins and your session starts to lag and the playback is a little sluggish, you can turn this on to get instantaneous playback. Another very important one, the most important one in my opinion, is the loop playback. So if you make a selection, notice that it'll loop. Also to toggle that is Command-Shift-L. So we turn on dynamic transport. This is going to offer some more flexibility for your looping and playback and kind of offers a whole new realm on top of it. So let me demonstrate. So if we make a selection and then we hit O, now we can play the selection, edit and move clips outside the selection, and also select anywhere we want to play within the loop or move the loop. So this can be useful for looping features if you want to be a little bit more dynamic with it. Now moving forward, we have a record button here. So to arm Pro Tools for recording, you simply hit the record button and then hit play. And as you can see, we're now recording. The other way to record in Pro Tools, and this is one of the most important commands, is Command Spacebar. And then hit spacebar to stop the recording. Now we have a few different recording modes we need to go over. So if we right click, we have normal, loop recording. So if I make a selection, it's going to keep looping that selection and recording over and over again. Now if you want to loop the recording and store all those loop takes, you need to go to your Pro Tools preferences. And then right here under operation, automatically create new playlists when loop recording. So now if we do that again, you can see that we've stored those takes away. We'll go over playlists and storing takes away later, but this just gives you an idea. Destructive record will rewrite over your regions and permanently delete that file. So instead of creating multiple files, this will literally rewrite permanently over your file. I never turn this on, but if you did need to save on disk space, you could turn on this option, though I don't recommend it. And then last but not least, one of the most important recording modes is quick punch mode. You can also toggle this on by Command-Shift-P. Punch recording has a lot of powerful features to it. All right, so to demonstrate punch mode, I'm going to use a duplicate channel of my microphone that you won't hear. So I'm going to hit play, and then I'm going to hit Command Spacebar when I want to punch in or start recording. And as you can see, there's the audio. I punched in. Everything's good. Now, what's also really amazing about punch recording is it actually arms your track with a secondary voice, meaning there's almost like a secret record track happening in the background, and I'll demonstrate and explain this. So let's do that one more time. I'm going to punch in my audio real quick. Now you can see I'm recording. Check 1, 2. There we go. Now, let's say that the artist was doing something interesting before they punched in, something before the actual recording time. If you were in a normal recording mode, you wouldn't have captured that. It would be gone. But in punch mode, when you're playing the audio, you are secretly recording it at the same time. So notice that if I go here and drag out the audio, there was the audio of me talking before the recording started. So this is so incredibly useful, especially if somebody does something really cool and you didn't capture it. In punch mode, you actually did. All right, now let's talk about pre-roll, post-roll, and fade-in. which also are great complements to punch and recording. So pre-roll, very simply put, pre-roll is simply the amount you play before the recording punch-in point. So as you can see here, as soon as I turn this on, we get this little yellow flag. And wherever I move this yellow flag, it's going to play the audio from there before I start recording. So if I put it right here and I hit record, notice that it played it from the yellow flag and then punched in the recording at the desired location. And then because we're in punch mode, I secretly captured what was playing in the background, which is great. The easiest way to trigger your pre-roll, and one of my favorite things, is all you have to do is hold the Option key and click anywhere you want on the timeline. And notice now my yellow flag pre-roll is moving around with it. So this is so incredibly easy to set up a pre-roll point. You could set where you want to record, go Option click, and it's that simple. So pre-roll is incredibly important because you need to play back audio before they start recording so they can get into the take and know where they are in time. Now, post-roll is almost the same thing, but it's a little different. So if we turn that on, you're going to notice there's a yellow flag after the insertion marker. Now, you might expect it to stop at that marker, but it's not that simple. Notice that it didn't stop at the post-roll marker. So post-roll is only active when you make a selection. So now that I made my selection point of where I want to punch in, now notice that it stopped at the post-roll marker. So post-roll will only work when you make a selection. Now, a lot of the times, I like to have my post-roll at a very high value, something like 100. Just because, let's say I talk with a client and I tell them, hey, let's just punch in this one part here, but they decide to keep going. Well, because I'm in punch and recording, even though I think we're done, while it's playing back, it's still secretly capturing the take. So to demonstrate, all right, so now we're punching in the audio, and now let's say maybe I want to keep going and keep going, keep going. Now notice I only made the recording at that selection point, but because I was in punch recording and I had the post-roll marker set so far ahead, while I was playing it after the insertion point, it was still capturing all that audio. Very, very, very useful. So with punch and recording, pre-roll and post-roll, this is going to ensure that you have a seamless recording session and everything is captured properly. All right, now let's look at our MIDI controls. So first off, we have wait for note. This is primarily used for MIDI. So if you turn this on and you hit record, the Pro Tools recording will not start until you trigger the note on your keyboard or whatever your MIDI device is. So to demonstrate, I'm going to hit record. Notice it's not recording until I hit my key. All right, now we have our metronome. This is a very, very important feature in Pro Tools. So if I double click on that, you're going to get a lot of different options where you can have it only during play and record, only during record, only during count off. You can change the accents. You can even output it to a MIDI instrument, so you could basically have your own type of click track. And you can have the count off only during record, so you have a lot of flexibility and a lot of options. Now, one weird thing about Pro Tools is if you turn this on, you're not going to hear the click track because you need to create a click track. So what you need to do is go to Track and Create Click Track. Otherwise, you will not hear a click track. All right, so if you turn this on and you create your click track, you're now going to hear a click. The next button here is MIDI Merge. Let's say you want to record on top of an already recorded MIDI performance. If you turn this on, it'll allow you to add notes to a previous MIDI clip. So right here, if I hit record, notice that it'll record those notes on top of the performance and not delete the previous performance. So it'll merge that MIDI to a previous take. If you have this off, it's going to overwrite the performance. As you can see. Now we have the conductor track. The conductor track is pretty much used for tempo changes. Think of like a conductor in a performance. So we turn on conductor track, and if we go up here and turn on our tempo ruler, you're going to see a tempo that's displayed. So if we open the little triangle here, we could add a tempo change if we wanted to. I could click the little plus button here and say that let's change it here to 100. And now you can see that tempo change is reflected. So to do tempo changes in Pro Tools, you're going to want to have the conductor mode on. Okay, now let's look at our count off. Now, if you want to trigger your count off, which is basically just a 4-bar count before you come into your recording or whatever your time signature is, turn this on. Make sure your metronome is set up properly. And this will be your click count off options if you double click your metronome. So let's say I only want to hear it during the count off. Right now it's set to 1 bar. So notice if I hit Command Spacebar and record, we only hear the click track in the count off. If I wanted the click track to be during play and record, I would turn that on. So very, very important options. Make sure to double click on this and make sure you have the proper settings selected for your session. All right, this is the meter. So this is the time signature of your session. Most of the time it's going to be 4/4, but you might have a waltz or a 6/8. So you just double click on that and you can change the meter of your song. Down here is your tempo. Now this is separate from the conductor track. This is basically to set a master tempo for the session. So all you have to do is click on the number here, type it in, hit enter, and now you can see my tempo is set at 60 BPM. Now let's talk about how you would find tempo in Pro Tools. There's 2 ways. There's a simple way and a very complicated way. The first easy way is to click on the number, play your song, and tap the T key. Basically, you want to just tap 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. If your song's in 4/4, along with the song. So let me demonstrate. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. All right. So it's either 90 or 91. I'm going to go with 90. So I'm going to type in 90, hit enter. Now I'm going to add my click track and make sure that it's syncing up with the beat. And it sounds like the song is 90 BPM. Perfect. So that's the most basic way to find tempo in Pro Tools. Now I'm going to show you the more advanced way. Method 2 is a bit more confusing, but I'll break it down real quick. So you're going to want to turn on the conductor mode. Make sure that you can see your tempo ruler. And then let's say I have a song that has a long intro, and then eventually you see a big kick drum hit, or the start of a song, a big splash of the waveform. All right, so right there you can hear there's the start of the kick drum. All I'm going to do is click right before that big hit, hit tab, hit the B key to break that up, and then I'm going to count a 2-bar loop. 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4, and 1. Okay, I'm going to click before that, hit tab, hit B to break that up. So now I should have a perfect 2-bar loop. Perfect. Now I'm going to go Command I to bring up the Add Bar and Beat Markers window. Now you can see Pro Tools is showing me what's reflected on the timeline, but I'm going to change this and put in bar 1 for the start and bar 3 for the end. So essentially I'm lying to Pro Tools just to help it calculate the tempo. I hit OK. And then notice in the tempo ruler up here, Pro Tools has calculated the tempo. We have 89.9847. That's very, very close to 90, so I'm able to round up to 90, and now I know my tempo is 90. So all I would do after knowing that is hit undo, because as you can see, there's some negative values in the timeline because I offset everything. You don't want that. So just go Command Z. So now that I know my tempo is 90, I can click up here, type in 90, hit enter, and now my song is perfectly on the grid. All right. For my next example, I'm going to take a song that was not recorded to a click track. It's a human performance, and it fluctuates in timing. Now, the next thing we're going to be doing is known as tempo mapping, where we make Pro Tools conform to the audio so that Pro Tools click track aligns perfectly with the human recorded performance. So first off, a few things need to be on to do this. Make sure you have conductor track on and that you can see your tempo ruler. And then you want to make sure that you find the overall tempo of the song first. So let's hear our performance. All right, so I know that's about 75 BPM for that performance. Let's go into grid mode here. Let's try 76. All right, perfect. It seems to be around 76. Now, that's all good and well, but eventually this audio is going to fall out of time because it changes. And as you can see, if I zoom into the second bar here, the start of that kick drum hit is not exactly on the grid line. It's a little bit before it. So if I do tab to transit, you can see there's a little bit of a discrepancy. So this next method to make sure that Pro Tools conforms its click track to my audio is called tempo mapping. And this is all you do. Anytime you see the audio fall off the grid line, you're just going to click before it and hit tab and then hit Command I. And then as you can see here, we have 14933. Now that's very close to 2. So I'm going to round up or round down if it was closer to a lower value. And I'm just going to tell Pro Tools, hey, that isn't bar 14933. This is bar 2. And then notice that the grid line moves exactly to where my insertion marker is. And now it's perfectly on time with the click track. So now to demonstrate. Perfect, that feels great. And then whenever the song starts to fall off of the tempo, I would just do that exact same method throughout the whole song, and then eventually my click track would be perfectly synced to my song. So those are a few of the ways to deal with tempo in Pro Tools. Now we have Quantize controls. Quantize allows us to put our audio performances in time. So if we bring up our MIDI performance here, all right, so that wasn't very in time, but all I have to do now is click on the clip, set my quantize value. I could do 1/8 note, 16th note, change the strength, the swing, and then all I have to do is hit Q. And now you can see my notes are perfectly in time with the song. Very useful. And then we have synchronization to sync to external machines, which we're not going to talk about in this course. We have Ableton Link, which is a newer feature as well. This basically allows you to sync Pro Tools with different programs, light shows. You just turn this on, then you can click the link button, and this will sync it to external programs. Our output meters just shows us the output of Pro Tools. Yukon is for Yukon control surfaces. We're not going to go over that. Expanded transport allows you to see more things. Then we have our universe view. This is just an easier way to move around Pro Tools. I personally don't use this often, but that's all it is. This is our track list that shows us our tracks, which allows us to hide them, display them, all these good things. Here's our clip list of all the clips in the session. We can bring up our MIDI editor, which is also Control equal, by the way. And then we also have clip effects. This is a really, really cool feature in Pro Tools that allows you to process effects just to specific clips. So let's say maybe I want this clip to be just brighter than the other clips. I can add that effect just to this clip, and then the rest of it will be completely normal. So for instance, let's say I want this clip to be very muddy, but this clip I want it to be very bright. I could do that with clip effects. So as you can hear, 2 different clip effects for 2 separate clips. Very, very useful. You can also toggle that by option 6 on the numpad. That covers the entire top bar of Pro Tools. Now let's look at some other things.